you have these two people that fell in love at some point. They got married, or maybe they're not married, but they've been together for years and years. And all of a sudden, midlife comes in. Who is this person? Each partner is probably thinking that. Who is
Yeah.
this person? Where is she? Where is he? Where is the love, right?
Yes.
How
Yeah.
has it gotten so mundane with the hormones happening in your body? Your experience of life and your relationship is different. If your health feels overwhelming and you are tired of chasing symptoms, and maybe you're looking for a more calm, a more grounded way to understand what's going on in your body, you are in the right place. Welcome to Living Inspired. I'm your host, Rachel Carta. I'm a registered nurse, functional nutrition counselor, and life coach. This podcast is for women who are dealing with fatigue, stress, hormonal changes, sleep issues, and who want to feel calm, confident, and like themselves again, or even so much better. Here, we take a functional root cause approach to women's health, energy, and resilience. We talk about what's really driving the symptoms and how small, sustainable shifts can make a real difference over time. This is a space for clarity, for calm, and for whole person healing. Because feeling better isn't about doing more, and living an inspired life takes intention. It's about what your body, mind, and soul are asking for. And remember, we are all unique, everything is connected, and all things matter. So grab a notebook, a cup of tea, or listen while taking a walk, and let's dive into today's topic. Welcome to another episode of the Living Inspired podcast. I have to tell you that recently I was looking through Instagram and all of a sudden this post caught my eye. And not only did I read it, digest it, and think about how I could apply it to my own life, but I also sent it to a client and she had the same feeling. Where has this been my whole life? I'm so excited to finally be able to say that after reading this and following this creator, I reached out to her and I have Brooke Davis here on the podcast today, and she runs the Instagram handle Marriage in Perimenopause. So make sure you follow that. We'll mention it again at the end. But if you're someone who is in the time of perimenopause and menopause, so this could be starting around age 35 all the way to beyond, right? And you're noticing that things are feeling different in your body and they're also feeling different in your relationship. Brooke is the expert who's been combing through the research, trying to figure out what in the world is going on in her own body and then for all of us. She is a voice talking to us in the darkness, and I'm so excited to have her here. After I introduce her, I want to tell you about that post. So, Brooke, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm so glad to be here. And it just really means so much hearing that, we're not alone in going through this. All women are asking very similar questions, having very similar experiences. Although symptoms might be different, but we're seeing things show up in our relationship. So I don't think that that is anything that is any different for anybody. So you're not alone in this, is what I want to say.
Well, that's a beautiful place to start because I think that in this time of life, for various reasons, women do feel very alone. It's a very interesting time of life where maybe you're raising kids, maybe they're already grown, maybe you're also taking care of aging parents, you're working, you're running your house, and it can feel really lonely. I know that from a really deep level. So I love that you're starting us off right away with reminding me and my listeners that we're not alone. And we hope that this episode educates you, but also helps you to really feel that not alone so that
Yeah.
you know how.
We're not alone in going through this. All women are asking very similar questions, having very similar experiences. Although symptoms might be different, but we're seeing things show up in our relationship. So I don't think that that is anything that is any different for anybody. So you're not alone in this, is what I want to say.
Well, that's a beautiful place to start because I think that in this time of life, for various reasons, women do feel very alone. It's a very interesting time of life where maybe you're raising kids, maybe they're already grown, maybe you're also taking care of aging parents, you're working, you're running your house, And it can feel really lonely. I know that from a really deep level. So I love that you're starting us off right away with reminding me and my listeners that we're not alone. And we hope that this episode educates you, but also helps you to really feel that not alone so that
Yeah.
you know how you can be empowered. You can be empowered. Knowledge really does help us to be empowered, especially with your content, because you have these two people that fell in love at some point. They got married, or maybe they're not married, but they've been together for years and years. And all of a sudden, midlife comes in. Who is this person? Each partner is probably thinking that. Who is
Yeah.
this person? Where is she? Where is he? Where is the love? Right?
Yes.
How
Yeah.
has it gotten so mundane? That's the word that comes to my mind. And where's
Yeah.
the joy? And what Brooke is going to share with us and what we're going to dive into is that there's many reasons why this could be the case. With the hormones happening in your body, your experience of life and your relationship is different.
Truly.
So, Brooke, thank you so much. Go ahead and share with us. I do want to talk about this post, but before we
Yeah.
get too deep, share with us a little bit about why this content, why are you creating this, and what sparked that fire in you that I can see coming through every post that you make.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what I found was, probably in my 20s, I had a PCOS diagnosis. So, I became interested in hormone health then. And I wanted to look at it through the lens of fertility. So, I wanted to learn all about that and make sure that I was able to have children, which I was blessed and had two boys. And then it really hit me in my mid 30s, like you were talking about, mid to late 30s. I started feeling all these different symptoms in my body. I was feeling different, had a lot of things that would be classic symptoms of perimenopause, but didn't really put the two to two together because I was really learned so much in my past about the health of all these hormones. I wasn't thinking about when they started actually depleting of what that would actually do. And so that kind of got me on a journey of starting to do some research about it because when I went to my doctor, unfortunately, I was kind of dismissed and just told that what I was experiencing was just stress. I was just aging, and every woman goes through that. And that wasn't really the answer that I was looking for because I thought, I don't want to spend the rest of my, 20, 30, 40, 50 years that I have left on this earth feeling like this. I was feeling disconnected from my spouse. I was being short with my children, I was on edge, irritable all the time. And I thought, no, I can't do this. So that's what started me down a research rabbit hole. I started doing the medical sciences, reading journals. At the time, I was working with physicians. So I was speaking with experts, talking to endocrinologists, learning all this information. And then what I really wanted to put together with it was like, okay, I know the medical science of it now. I understand this piece, but why am I being so disconnected in my marriage? Like,
Mhm.
why am I still having these issues and feeling this irritation towards my spouse? Like, why is that? And so that sent me down another rabbit hole. So then I started doing the research on relationship dynamics and how changes occur and how things impact because we know you just said midlife is so full of changes. We're in the sandwich generation, raising children and taking care of aging parents. We're at a point in our life, careers are usually very much peaking at this time, high demands. And so I thought, okay, we're missing a piece of this. So it has to be this hormone connection. And as I was doing this research and talking to experts and having interviews, I noticed a lot of my friends, a lot of my family members, they were having very similar symptoms. They were disconnected from their spouse. They were even separating. Some were divorcing. And after conversation and talking to these folks, I think what we learned was that we didn't understand the hormonal piece and how that was impacting our marriages at that time. So that's been about a span of 10 years. And it kind of led me to this point like, okay, I've learned a lot about this. I've witnessed this. I've talked to people about this. I need to share this. People need to know about this. Couples need to be aware of what's happening in midlife and what they can do to get through it together. You don't have to separate or divorce unless there's an underlying issue that's happening already. But if it's just simply to the point where you're both feeling like a little bit of strangers in your relationship, there's probably a hormone issue happening at that point in time that's making changes throughout your body. So that's how I landed here.
Thank you so much, Brooke. It's so cool to hear how you came to this through your own experience And
Yeah.
I think all of that research that you've been able to distill, what I also like to do that to take a complex, something complex and make it more simple. And that is what I feel when I read your posts. I feel that you are shining a light on something that, as you've said, many women listening have had the experience of going to the doctor and saying, I do not feel like myself. I'm moody. I don't feel good. I'm bloated. I'm gaining weight. They're saying all these things. And a lot of times they're walking away with an antidepressant or maybe birth control. Like this is what's happening. And it's such a disservice to women that we're trying to get help and the it's just not there. And so
Yeah.
I'm so happy to see that not just you, but there's more of this coming out. If you start following things about menopause on
Yeah.
social media, you'll get more and more because now there are some leading physicians that are talking
Mhm.
about it and they're creating a movement around it, which is such a beautiful thing. So I'd
Absolutely.
love to dive in because maybe some of our listeners don't really understand why hormones have an effect in midlife, like what's going on. And I have had podcasts about this recently, but from
Mhm.
your perspective, Brooke, how can we explain to our women listening and men? I hope that there's also men listening. In fact, women, after you listen, this is going to be one that we want to have our partners listen to also.
Yeah,
As a
absolutely.
sidebar, even after my first conversation with Brooke, I felt like I was able to have a conversation with my own husband about some issues that we were having, likely
Mhm.
related to hormone changes and everything we've discussed. So my hope for all of this is that you can take this and both of you can chart a new path
Yeah.
now that you're empowered with information and understanding. So Brooke, why are hormones such a big factor in midlife? What have you determined from all the research that you've done?
Yeah. So actually, as we know, hormones are not just reproductive regulators. A lot of people really get stuck and hung up on that of thinking that's what they do. But we know there's all kinds of hormones in our body that do all kinds of different things. So, but when reality, they're chemical messengers that influence nearly all the body systems and especially our brain. I don't think a lot of people actually connect that either sometimes and thinking about how that impacts us. And they set the tone for our mood, our memory, and even how resilient we are to stress. And that's why you hear a lot of women say things like, I don't feel like myself anymore. And the little tiniest thing just made me blow my lid off, things along those lines. And so when you think about estrogen, all right, well, it supports serotonin and dopamine. Those chemicals regulate our mood and emotional stability. And when that dips, there goes our patience. Our memory feels foggy and irritability rises. And then you think about progesterone. So if we don't have that beautiful hormone hanging around, that is where we can kind of get estrogen gets a little unregulated sometimes. But that really helps us get that deep sleep. So when we're not getting that deep sleep, we know what happens to us when we don't have that nice 6, 7, 8 hours of sleep. All of a sudden we're waking up at 3 in the morning. We have anxiety. We feel like we're anxious. We feel like we're wired. And then so when we're talking with our spouse, that's going to bubble out, right? Those are the things that we're already feeling, and it makes it even harder. And so when these energy drops, follow through feels harder, and our confidence even takes a hit.
Mm,
So when these shift, they don't just stay in us, they spill over into that relationship.
mm,
Mood swings, sleep disturbances, lack of interest and intimacy, there aren't just personal issues. They directly affect how we communicate, the patience that we have, the affection that we show, and even how couples interpret each other's behaviors, too. So that's why I say hormones really set the stage for how we experience stress and connection in these stages of life. Because when you think about all these things happening to you, your spouse is experiencing with you as well.
That's such a good point. Like sometimes we do think that we're the only ones that are feeling all these fluctuations and changes. But I even think about my kids and how, when I don't get that good night's sleep, I'm definitely not as patient. You know, I love that you brought up resilience. I'm actually working on a workshop right now that's going to be explaining the why we have that lack of resilience and what we can do about it. And along with that resilience, when we're not resilient, we're going to have more mood swings and it's all connected. And I love that you said It just makes it feel different. And I also love that you say the chemistry that supported resilience and connection has shifted. And
Yeah.
here's the key. No one ever taught you how to navigate that together. I,
Never.
I went to like a 12-week, maybe it wasn't 12, maybe 8-week marriage class. Okay. And I don't think anybody said anything about hormones.
No.
And that's a huge piece of the puzzle because if you're blessed enough to be with someone at that time of life, then there's going to be shifts in your life. And
Yeah.
I'd love to see, like you explained to us that one of the biggest challenges with the hormone shifts is that they look and feel like relationship problems. And this, I think, is what right before I showed my client that post of yours, we had
Yeah.
literally had a conversation about her being very frustrated with her partner because she felt like she was doing everything in the house. And we had this conversation about it. And then the next, I think it was later that day, I saw your post. And
Oh,
I'd love to just briefly share with our listeners
yes.
about that because I think it kind of fits in here. In your post, you talked about something called the estrogen veil. And I love that phrase because it's almost like we're protected in some way by the estrogen. Now, that's a rabbit hole because the estrogen protects so many
Everything.
parts, so many systems in the body. I
Yes.
mean, bone density, muscle, every system is affected by
Mhm.
estrogen. We don't think about that. But in your post, you talked about the lifting of this veil, okay? And you said that estrogen acts like a filter. It calms our stress hormones, it boosts our mood, and it makes it easier to let things slide. And I
Yeah.
never in a million years could have connected that, oh, this is why I'm so annoyed by his crap on the other side of the bed when it's been there for a long time. Why is it suddenly bothering me? Right?
Yeah.
And you say that as the levels of estrogen decline in perimenopause, the filter thins. Everyone who's in this knows. Suddenly his chewing is annoying, right?
Yeah.
Has that happened to anyone else? Like
Yes.
it's like things are just your levels of tolerance are just so much lower.
Yes. And so, in thinking, like, a lot of people don't realize like sensitivity is a big thing in perimenopause, and that could be sound, noise, and touch sensitivity. So, a lot of people don't connect the dots on those either. So, that's why the chewing becomes very annoying. That's why when someone touches you when you're not quite aware and you have that electrical shock or jump, and then lights, really bright lights, really bother me now at this stage in life. It's just like too much. It's too much. And so that is a big piece of it as well, too.
You know, that's so helpful to point out because I have chronic migraines. So a lot of that stuff I assume is coming from the migraine side of things. But of course, chicken or the egg, which came first? Because they came
Yeah.
during perimenopause. So
Yeah.
which one was first? But I love that we're talking about this because I think we're really also hoping to normalize this. So
Yeah.
in your post, it's like, why does this feel so different? The lower estrogen means you just said this, less serotonin and less dopamine. So our irritability is sharper, stress is harder to buffer, and we're pushing through and it's exhausting. And it hasn't been that we've changed overnight. That's another great point about this post. I
Mhm.
think sometimes it feels like you've changed overnight, but you say that your biology stopped cushioning what wasn't working.
Yep. Very much so. I mean, when you don't have those nice, cushioning, what I like to say, buffers, things like that, when those peel back, it really kind of reveals to you things that just aren't working for you anymore. And sometimes that is looking at patterns in your relationship. Sometimes that's looking at the mental load, the emotional load of your relationship. And sometimes you see a little more clearly, is what I think the whole post kind of points out too. It's not a negative thing. It's really like, what have I been hustling and caring for too long that I can't just continue to do? And so I think sometimes that's a blessing for some women as well. It does point out that, you can't just carry everybody's load all the time and just be, this happy-go-lucky person. Your biology is not designed to do that. And it's okay. That's okay. I think a lot of people think that they have to continue to hustle, and that really points things out. And I think that's why that post is so really reaches a lot of people and resonates, is because they're like, you know what? Yeah, I need to reevaluate what my relationship looks like, or and it could be a relationship with work, or a relationship with friends, relationship with your spouse, or anything that you're doing. You might really just want to reevaluate it at that time. So I think that is a really strong drawing point for a lot of people when they realize, oh, this is why.
Oh, I love how you said that. It's a reevaluation time. It's a time
Mhm.
to notice what's working and what's not. And you're
Mhm.
saying it's beyond your partner. Like look at your job, look at your lifestyle, look at I mean, I work with women in perimenopause and menopause and even younger women who we just have such a hard time creating space for self-care. And in
Yes.
in my opinion, at this stage of life, it's not a nice to do anymore. It's a if we don't do it, we're going to fall apart.
Right.
I always say that I have to do a bunch of different things just to be baseline okay. Like I have to breathe, I have to go outside, I have to drink water, I have to eat vegetables, just to
Yes.
be baseline okay because this is the time of life where it matters more than ever to do that because your tolerance is that much lower. You
Yeah.
also say in this post that women often notice that carrying that mental load, and we could talk about that for a minute if you want, but
Mhm.
there's like this feeling of resentment now. And this is what some of my clients are talking about.
Yeah.
Words come out faster. You speak up before you can swallow it down. And what you've tolerated now just is not tolerable anymore.
Yeah.
Disconnection that you used to just brush off now feels painful and personal. This is not failure, you say. It's your body insisting on honesty.
Yeah. Very much so. I mean, I think when you just really think about that, it's a rediscovery of really who you are. I
Mm.
mean, you're not the same woman that you were in your 20s, and you aren't the same one you were in your 30s, and you're not going to be the same woman in your 40s or 50s. You're constantly made to evolve. And that reevaluation is so important at every stage in life. But when you hit perimenopause, it doesn't just say to you, like when you're maybe in your 20s and 30s, you actually took time to pause to think about things. No, this says this is the pause,
Mm.
and you're going to need to do something about it now. It doesn't wait for you at all, and sometimes it interrupts things, in your life that you have to sit down and look at and say, is this what I want? Is this what I want more of, or is this what I don't want to have anymore? So it really opens up a lot of deep, deep questions, I think, for people, and sometimes that's a little scary, right? Because all of a sudden we're reevaluating things that we didn't really think too much about maybe over the past 10 or 15 years. We were busy, we were busy probably working, we were raising families, we were doing other things, volunteering our time. And now it's kind of put out there and says, hey, you got to make some decisions, gal.
I like that. I really like that. It's the pause. It's the say, hey, let's stop. And as you were talking about that, it was making me think about what do these partners, what must they think when all of a sudden you're different? And now you're not tolerating what they've been, quote, getting away with. Hate to say it
Yes.
that way, but
Yes.
why is it suddenly not acceptable? And what's your thoughts on what they are feeling about this?
Yeah. So, I mean, I could even speak from my own husband's experience,
Yeah, please.
that he started noticing that I didn't seem as patient or as kind. And he pointed that out to me. And that's kind of what started me on my journey, too, of like, I need to get some help because I'm not liking how I'm feeling or I'm behaving. Even one night at dinner, we were in the kitchen and he asked me about some part of the recipe that needed it. And I just lost it, just like, can't you just read it yourself? Why do you have to ask me every time what the question is? Like it
Mhm.
just, and it was before I could even think, like it was just out of my mouth way quicker than anything. And I was like, wow. Like, like after the fact, I was like, wow. And he was like, yeah, don't talk to me until you're calmed down, because I hurt him. I mean, I used words that, could have been said very differently. And I used them as a knife, like, and that was some of my breaking point too, was like, okay, I can't keep treating, this loving man like this. Yeah,
Mhm.
we all have our flaws, right, in our relationship, but this is a very loving, kind man. Why am I doing this? And so, he pointed out other things to me too, like, you just really, as soon as I say something, you're ready just to jump on me and, shut things down. You don't allow me to talk anymore. You don't want to talk to me anymore, all these things. And I was like, huh, okay, now he felt shut out. He
Mm.
felt shut down and he felt shut out because anything that he would say, I would turn it around, and try to use it against him or just say, you don't know what's going on with me or leave me alone. And I was like, that's not how I've behaved. And so to him, it was shocking, like this is very shocking behavior. And, when I finally did get help, I needed to work through some things, Rachel, that were buried deep in my soul that I thought I had dealt with.
Mm.
But these shifting hormones had really unearthed some things that
Mm.
I had not had an opportunity to work through. And so I went to therapy and I got a lot of things out that I didn't even know were still hurting me. And I was able to use some tools and I was able to, really kind of get back to what I was. And just when you think about that, just you're dealing with old things, you're dealing with new things. He would bring up something and I bring up something from 10 years ago and fight about it. Like,
Mm.
why am I doing this? And it got me to a much better headspace and heart space at that time by doing that, because it was just something that I didn't know that I was going to have to work through myself. And I think that's shocking too, to a lot of women, that they don't realize that it really brings up things. And then, kind of after that, I had to go on to get some additional help. I had to go to a hormone therapist specialist. I had to go to a registered dietitian. I even had to go to a chiropractor. I had such chronic pain because all my hormones were shifting and I was getting those achy joints and achy hips and the back was started hurting. And that started all healing my nervous system. It really kind of started making me become a whole person again. I felt like I was disjointed from who I was, and the things that were spilling out of me was dysregulation,
Mm.
all throughout my body. And I hurt my husband the worst, through that whole time, because there's something called the lightning rod effect, and you'll hear psychologists use that. And we unload on people that we feel the closest to. It's very natural because we feel safe with them. And, sometimes we might, latch out at them. We might, really come to them to cry on their shoulder, things like that. And so when you go through hormonal changes, very similar. That person is your safe space, but they kind of get the worst version of you at that time, unfortunately. And so I think that's where a lot of relationships start to crumble, during this time frame, because, sometimes the women don't realize what they're going through. The men have no clue what we're going through. Let's just say that, they're just shocked. Like, why are you behaving this way? Why are you, what's going on with you? And then that makes us angry because can't you see something is going on with me? And it gets us to that point where we're at a disconnect or we're at an impasse, essentially. And it took me one night in my car, driving home from work. I sat down in my car and it hit me like a ton of bricks, just this emotional irritabilities, feelings, everything just started coming out. And I just had to sit there and scream in my car and beat my steering wheel because I was like, I can't live like this. I can't continue to feel this way. I can't continue to behave in this manner. Like, what is wrong with me? And, it was just such an emotional moment that was my turning point at 47.
Mm.
And I'm, getting ready to turn 50. So it's just been a couple of years ago that I've had all this experience. And, that was just a big eye opening in my world about, wow, like I can't believe all of this has happened in our relationship and to the point we are now, which is much better place because we both took the time to understand, learn, find out what's going on, get me the right help, all those things. It took all of it. It took me and him together to do it, really.
Thank you for sharing that. I feel like what a brave story and journey to share with us. And I know that it had to take so much courage to address the things in your past that were hard. And I one thing that you said is you went to therapy, but you also saw a dietitian, you also saw a doctor to deal with hormones. You know, it's so important to look at these things holistically. So in my work, I do functional nutrition with women
Yes.
and we look at the whole system. We look at your whole story, and every piece matters, and there's always roots to why you feel the way you do. And some women have a much different, I mean, all women have a different perimenopause, menopause experience. A
Yes.
lot of it has to do with underlying conditions. I
Yes.
recently learned that 87% of women in perimenopause have another chronic illness,
Hmm.
which tells us that there's other things brewing that are going to affect what you experience. And it could
Yes.
be that trauma. It could be, the fact that you have a huge one side of the load in the family, which again is just depleting your nervous system. You also said something so important is that your whole system was dysregulated. And everyone listening, please lean in because it's so important to know that your nervous system being out of whack is the catalyst for everything. And I have found in my work that if we start there, real change can happen. You don't have to be controlled by these symptoms. The
Mhm.
answer may or may not be hormone therapy for you, but it
Right.
can't start there without other foundational pieces. And
Yeah.
that is another conversation probably, but I just
Yeah.
wanted to just put that in because it's important to know that understanding your whether you feel regulated or not has a huge effect on the outcome of your experience in midlife. And I'm
I
so glad that you brought that up. Um, let's talk a minute about, let's just switch gears and talk about brain fog for a minute, because just this weekend I was buying something and I literally pulled out my chapstick to pay instead of my credit card.
love it.
You guys can't see, but Brooke gave me a thumbs up on the screen. Has anyone else done anything crazy like that? I mean, that for me was I lose words. That does happen, but the
Yes.
overt pulling of handing my chapstick to the checkout lady, that was a very funny moment for both of us, as she was also in the menopausal time of life. Speak to
Yeah.
us about brain fog. I have my thoughts about it and my understanding of it physiologically, but tell me how it affects marriage.
Okay, well, so a lot of times this is where we, like you were saying, we walk into a room, we can't remember why. We lose important pieces of paper, like we thought we put it here on this desk and now it's not there. Where might it be? Well, it's probably in our freezer, there's lots of things that brain fog really impact. And also, it's kind of like not just memory recall, but it's like how quickly our brain processes things too. So, you could be having a conversation just like you and I, and then mid sentence, you just can't remember what you were going to say or process what I said to you. And you might have to stop and think for a second or two about how you want to respond when that used to come naturally.
Mhm.
And I think that is, a lot of women, they get very worried when they experience brain fog, just due to the fact I've heard some women say, I thought I was having early onset dementia,
Mhm.
all these times it was happening and things like that. But in your marriage, when you think about having brain fog and you can't recall words or you can't recall sometimes a topic that you were talking about, to our partners, our husbands, or whatever it might be, I kind of looked at that as like, what's wrong? Like, why have you just lost your mind? Like, why are you having all these issues talking to me? Like, you're not, are you listening to me? That's what my husband would tell me sometimes, is might be talking to me and my brain was just not keeping up with it. Or sometimes my brain would just go off to somewhere else because I might pick up one keyword he would say and it would just take my mind to somewhere else.
Mhm.
And it wouldn't be on the topic that he would be talking about. And I would have to say, what? Can you tell me that again? And then he would just get frustrated. He was like, you're
Mhm.
just not listening to me. And it's not that I don't want to listen. It's just like my brain is just not able to hold on to all of that at one time.
Mhm.
And so we had to develop, our own little language. We kind of had to say, it's foggy today is what I would kind of say to him when things were kind
Mhm.
of, I was just really couldn't keeping up with stuff. And I could really tell those days I would wake up and my brain just wasn't firing like it used to. Or the day before, it might be fine the next day that it's not. And I say, it's really foggy today. So you're just going to have to, bear with me. Please be patient. I'm trying my best. And when he knew that, it was a whole different game, right?
Mhm.
Like he could respond with compassion instead of getting frustrated with me. And he would say, here's what I want to do. And he would tell me, he was like, okay, you got that, or you need me to repeat that? And I would usually say, go ahead and repeat it. So that way I could get it one more time, or whatever it might be. But it really takes that two-way communication when you're experiencing brain fog. But this shows up in all parts of life. But I think in your marriage, it can, your spouse could look at it as that you don't care anymore, that you're just not, caring enough to listen to what they're saying, or, what might be as conversational wise. When you're having brain fog, you don't really want to have a deep conversation anyway, right?
Mhm.
Because you're
Mhm.
not in the mood for that and your body's not going to respond well in that situation either. So yeah, it's interesting. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about it.
Well, and it's funny that so I love that you guys have that communication system. It's foggy. It's so good because that could be used. One time I heard this Brene Brown, it was on social media, where she said that the spouses should come home and say, I'm at 10% right now. I just loved that because if you're just kind of saying, hey, this is where I am right now, then the other person doesn't have to take it personally. Because
Yes.
I know that for my husband, I mean, so much is taken personally because if I'm not showing up the way he would like, which he, it would be good if I could, but maybe I'm
Yeah.
at my capacity for the day. One thing that I say sometimes is I'm really at the top. I'm really at capacity. I can't do another thing. And my thing is I try not to make decisions after like 6 p.m. because I'm
Yes.
just exhausted and I can't. So if he's asking me about what kind of creamer to get at the store, I'm taking a breath and then saying, just decide. I'm fine with whatever. And I think
Yes.
for us that's been helpful for me to, and I want to do better at this to just kind of communicate where I am. And maybe after he listens to this, he'll be able to also understand that this is a real, also biological thing. Now, all that
Yes.
being said, and I want to keep reminding everyone that the lifestyle things and the holistic things you do for your health absolutely have an effect on all the symptoms we're talking about. This is not
Yeah.
like a sentence where you definitely have to experience these things for the rest of your life.
No.
This is really about learning how to take care of yourself on a really deep level so that these symptoms do not manifest as strongly as they are. Um,
Yes.
that's something that we want to keep bringing up because this isn't just because this is happening does not mean this is your story. There's so
Yes.
much that can be done. Um,
That's so important too. And that was important in my marriage too, right? Was to have that discussion that this is a transition. My body was designed for this transition. However, it does bring some symptoms and issues and things that we'll have to work through. And that kind of gives a time frame. Men really like time frames. They really, really do. They like to know how long something's going to last, when
Mm.
something's going to be done, when's the next date's available. They love that. And so when I was able to say, okay, here's what perimenopause means, here's around my age, here's what the research shows of like possibly when I would go into menopause, all these types of things. He could work with that then, like he felt like, okay, I know the timeline. And he felt much more engaged and involved in it and saying, oh, okay, all right, you're getting to this kind of, period of time. This is where these are these types of symptoms you told me you might be experiencing now. It's like, yes, yes, that's exactly where we're going. And I think that, it's just getting to that point. And I just want to put a plug here. I really feel like the younger generations are doing a much better job at this already than we are, than maybe some of the older millennials or Gen X's that are really peaking. We're really going through perimenopause now. It really wasn't discussed with us as women and definitely not with men. Men had only heard of the word menopause and they just thought, well, you just can't have a baby no more. Okay. Like that was their kind of baseline understanding. But the younger generations, I think, they've been tracking things for years. So they've been tracking things like the women's been tracking their periods, they've been tracking symptoms, they know their phases that they go through their cycle. And that was something that I feel like was a big disservice, like my age group, close to 50, that wasn't really discussed in health class. It was other, it was rarely just kind of told like this, you're going to have a menstrual period and it's going to happen every month and you're going to need pads or tampons and you're going to have a headache and you're going to have cramps and all this stuff. So good luck. I don't really recall learning anything about you know, the periods of time, the cycle, the month, anything, nothing. And they're learning so much more about it. So I think they're going to be much more in tune with their body.
Mm.
My son, that's 21, him and his girlfriend that are both 21, they track her cycle together so that
Wow.
he can support her during
What?
the different times of the month. So he knows when she needs comfort. He
Wow.
knows when she's got a lot extra energy, that's the time for them to go and do rambunctious things like hike and bike and all those things. So it's like they are in
Wow.
tune to it. So I feel like there is a reckoning coming. I'm
Wow,
so
that's
excited for
so cool that you bring that up because you're right. I never even tracked. In fact, I didn't even track my period until migraines. That was when I started. So 38 years old, suddenly
it.
starting to pay attention to it. I remember every single time going to the doctor and them asking me, when was your last period? I'm like, I don't know, because I never paid attention. And,
Yeah.
even going into functional nutrition school, when we learn about, before even perimenopause happens, the fluctuation of hormones is major. Like there are
Yeah.
things that are happening. Like you mentioned, there's times when you have more energy, times when you're more tired, more irritable, or hungrier. Imagine having a relationship where you're understood like that. Your
Yeah.
son, oh, good job, Brooke. Good
I
job with that one.
know, I know. Both of my boys learned a lot over the past, 10 years, essentially kind of like this whole, progress through years. And I think, that's great because, understanding your body, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that a lot of people think that's taboo, but that shouldn't be taboo. That's the basis of who you are as a person, understanding your body and how it works. It's so important.
Oh,
Uh,
yes. And there's
Anatomy and physiology needs to be taught like in elementary school, then again in middle school, then again in high school, and then all those times.
and then reminders throughout our life of why it matters. And it's interesting that you bring up the taboo thing because it is so true that there's such a, and you're right, and it's our generation that it is very taboo. I mean, I've shared this on the podcast before, but when I needed to get my period supplies, I had to write a note and leave it on my dad's desk when he wasn't in his office. He would get the stuff I needed and he'd put it on a bag on his door. Like there was no conversation. Like this was how I got what I needed. In fact, and I'm pretty sure I learned everything from my friend. So
Yep.
it wasn't it was such a time of confusion.
Yeah.
And I love that you're bringing this up so that anyone listening who's going through perimenopause, like I have a 13-year-old stepdaughter, so I'm hoping to be able to teach her so that, and I've been saying things like, this is normal, this is all normal, and let's understand it together. And, you know,
Yeah.
it's so interesting to bring in the guys into that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
My son is already, since I'm talking about working with women in perimenopause, he's already been like, "Hey, mom, what's this?" He's 10. So, of course, I have to,
Yeah.
I'm teaching him and he's learning about things. And,
Yeah.
sometimes he's not understanding of why my stepdaughter might need to be alone for a while. And
Right.
so it's teaching him about that. And why is
Yeah.
why is mom annoyed at my sounds I'm making when she didn't used to be? And so
Yes.
the education piece for the males, it is so important.
It is because I mean, if we're going to have relationships, with males, right? If females are going to have relationships with males, they need to understand, how a female works. They need to understand that and embrace it. You should embrace it. And the
Mhm.
same thing with us as women, we need to understand our men's body as well and understand, how their hormones cycle and what's going to happen to them when they're in their 40s and 50s and 60s. We're going to continue that relationship with them because hormones impact them, as well. It's just what I call it, a little steady taper, the
Mm,
way that their hormones kind of work. It's not like us in perimenopause where we have dips and spikes and, we have long periods of up and down, up and down, up and down. There's more like a steady, nice little decline. So, they're not going to have as severe symptoms as we do, but they are going to go through a period of time where they're going to be irritable. They're going to have less energy. They're going to be a little bit withdrawn or flat emotionally. That's going to happen to them as well. And so if you both understand what's going to happen and how you're going to agree to approach that
mm,
is super important for how successful your marriage will be. And I like to call your second act of life. And usually that should be your
yes.
best act of life.
I like that. Your second act. We talked about the cognitive changes like brain fog. We talked about fatigue, how that can show up as wanting to withdraw from conversations, not
Yes.
having the energy to engage. We also talked about the irritability and the anxiety. Like these are only some of the symptoms that could be going on in your body. What about libido?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I think it kind of goes back to the conversation we had earlier about the sensitivity issues. So, not only the touch, sensitivity, the sound, the light, and everything like that. And, as we know, we've got to have estrogen and we've got to have that testosterone because those really help make us want to, have affection towards someone. And what you find is that flatness that we feel and that emotionalness that we feel is that steady decline of those hormones.
Mm,
But however, what I like to point out to people is that in your second act of life, you become, your desire becomes more responsive. It's not spontaneous like it was in your younger years. In your younger years, you couldn't keep your hands off each other. You didn't even have to plan it. It just happened. But when you get into, your 40s and your 50s, it's more responsive. And when I say it's more responsive to other types of intimacy.
Mm.
So if you don't have emotional closeness, you're not going to want to have sex with your partner.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
If you don't share that emotional closeness, that's not going to happen, because our bodies just aren't going to respond to that. Um, and then also, if you don't have other types of intimacy, things like, sharing experiences together. And that's a lot of what your second act is about. Is like, okay, maybe we have empty nests now, maybe our kids are getting ready to, fly, and maybe we've changed careers and stuff like that. What are we experiencing together? What are the things that we're going out and doing together that brings us back to this, emotional closeness? And so when you go out and have these experiences, maybe it's a new hobby you do together, you go on a hike together, whatever, because sometimes you find out we live these parallel lives after we've raised our kids. We become these parents and we focus, focus, focus. And if we didn't nurture the relationship, when the kids leave, we look at each other and we're like, we're roommates. We don't have anything in common. But so you've got to have that experiential intimacy as well. And then there's intellectual intimacy. If you're not having these conversations with each other, not about perimenopause or changes, things that's going on, in your lives, maybe things that you've changed opinions on from when you were younger to where you're at now, what's meaningful to us in this place of time, what are we thinking, how we want to grow, maybe we're growing personally, professionally. And if we're not talking about that, that doesn't bring us emotional closeness either. So, if you don't have these different levels of intimacy, then physical intimacy is going to be much more difficult. And you have to plan it. So, I tell people all the time, if you're not planning a sex date, it's not probably going to happen, because it's not always going to be spontaneous. And if you think it's going to be spontaneous, then something's going to happen. Like, you're going to think, oh, well, let's go do this fun thing now. And then all of a sudden you're going to get an important phone call. Somebody's going to show up at your house to visit you. All these things are going to happen because we're adults and things happen in our life. And if you're not planning it, because there's anticipation in planning, and you're not saying, okay, this is date, we're going to make this a fun time. And then you can treat each other, right? Like, you should really know what turns your partner on, and your partner should really know what turns you on. And you should be doing more of that.
Mhm.
And, so you got to think about what it all takes now. It takes more time and it takes more effort, is what I like to tell people. But it's not that it's gone, but you've got to have that foundation of closeness first. If you don't have that and you don't work on that part, then the other types of intimacy don't, it just doesn't come to be, so easily, I guess you should say. So that is a tough one in this time of life. And hormones do play a part, but also, if it's that connection, if you don't have it, you're not just going to get, spontaneous with somebody that you are not connected with.
Brooke, that was the best answer ever. I mean, that was so good. I mean, I could say so many things about this. It's not, the best thing I heard was it's not spontaneous anymore. It's more responsive. And
Yeah.
that you have to have other types of intimacy to make this type want to come out. I think
Yep.
there's a lot of, I'm not sure if this is a lot of people, but feeling guilty that you're not feeling those feelings for your husband anymore, that you don't feel it the same way you used to
Mm-hmm.
without the other types of intimacy. And then on
Yeah.
the other side, the partner is feeling she's not interested in me anymore. She
Yeah.
doesn't think I'm attractive anymore. So you've got
Yes.
these two minds thinking two completely incorrect things. One is
Yep.
that it's my fault that something's broken in my body, and the other
Yep.
one is she doesn't care about me. I'm not attractive anymore. And
Yep.
so of course your backs are to each other at this point, because how can you come together when you're both operating from a false narrative?
Yep.
And I love what you said about the different types of intimacy. And I think that you also mentioned that it takes more effort. And that is something that we need to really explain to our partners in the most loving way, that
Yes.
the effort needs to happen because
Yes.
it just isn't the same. And that's okay too, because here's another thing. I do feel like because of the increase in effort and the more awareness on the levels of intimacy, that the connection can be stronger, a lot
Yeah,
stronger.
absolutely. I hear people say they have the best sex of their life after menopause.
Mm,
Um, and basically, you know why? Because they sat down and they had conversations about it. And they said, this is what works now.
hmm
And this is what I want more of. This is what I want less of. And this is how I respond to you this way. They actually take the time to do that because, like we said, you're not the same person, and it's okay. I mean, nothing like really, I think, spontaneous, yeah, that's fun, but that only lasts a short amount of time.
hmm
Responsiveness, woohoo, like you get to live in bliss a little bit longer and actually take time to enjoy your body and yourself and your partner. I think I read something from an intimacy expert that said, for a woman that, of course, we right now you just don't jump straight to intercourse, right? Because our body has to be ready for that. It takes, I think they said, at least 20 minutes, to get to the same pace maybe our spouse already is. They might be a little quicker to it, but it takes us about 20 minutes because sometimes we got to get out of our head,
hmm
right? Sometimes, even though we're thinking that we're doing this thing, we're always going, did I put the laundry in? Did I change
Right.
over that laundry thing? Did I
Totally.
respond to that email?
Totally. It's so distracting.
Yes. And so it takes us 20 minutes to get to that space. And, so when you're thinking about it, you're having these conversations that maybe you didn't used to have, right? Because it was spontaneous and that was just how it happened. But now you get to design what it is that feels good for your body. And
Mm.
believe me, your partner will do it. Your partner is going to be like, yes, I am there. I will make this happen. And
Mhm.
you just have to be honest with it. And it
Yeah.
might be completely different than how you responded, even 5 years ago. It might be a different way. And to be during the whole time while you're having intimacy, sharing, this feels good, this doesn't feel good, I need you to stop, or how about more of this and less of that. And then your husband loves to get a playbook. They do. When
Mm.
you tell them directions and what to do, they can follow that.
Mm.
And so if you're just expecting them to know what your body wants, you ain't gonna have no fun. You have to say, this is what I like, this is how I need things to happen. And they'll follow the rules. They liken it to something like a game book, like here's the rules of the game. They'll
Mhm.
follow it.
That's super helpful. Super helpful. I heard an interesting analogy that could help us really remember this, that a woman's body is like preheating an oven, where a man's body is like t cooking, heating something up in the microwave.
Perfect. I
Yeah.
love it. I
Mhm.
love it. It does it because
Yes.
you turn that oven on. It takes about a good 20 minutes to get it to the temperature you need to be at.
Yeah, and if again, it all goes back to that knowledge, like for them to know that and to love you enough to put in the effort and
Yes.
to put in the communication. And I think for a lot of people, it's going to be hard to have that communication, to say what you like, what you don't like, all of it. The
Hmm.
intimacy outside of like all of it is going to be a challenge for you potentially, but
Hmm.
it doesn't mean that it can't happen. It just takes more effort.
It
Um,
does. It does. And I think that's what a lot of people get hung up on. And it kind of goes back to what we said. Certain things, in our generation was considered taboo. And sex was another one of them.
100%.
And so to us, we were just always told, just do it and be done, and go on about it. We weren't really taught to say, oh, this is supposed to be pleasurable for me too. I'm supposed to get, something out of it as well. And so I think now also, since we talked about the estrogen veil lifting earlier, this is really where you can actually talk so much more honestly, because you kind of don't have those buffers around you anymore saying, I don't want to hurt his feelings, or I don't want him to be upset at me, or anything like that. You can actually be a little more assertive, and you probably feel a little more assertive now, at this point in life. And, you need to say, you know what, let's have a good conversation about what our intimacy looks like and how we can work through it together, what you want, what I want, and how we can make sure that we both feel good. And I think if you say that to a man, they're going to be like, I'm all ears. I want to know, because this is what I want. Because most men show love through, physical intimacy. That's,
Mhm.
one of their ways that they show love. And so when that is off the table, you're right, they don't feel loved, and they feel like, that maybe that love is gone in that capacity there.
Mhm.
And some women, feel love that way too. But not all women, we need all the other levels of intimacy to feel safe and secure in that type of intimacy.
Yeah, absolutely. Like even for myself, I never knew that words of affirmation were a love language for me. I don't think they always were. I think that's
Yeah.
more in recent years. Just even
Nice.
knowing that this matters. These conversations matter. To feel
Yeah,
connected, conversation has to be a part of it. So when there
absolutely.
isn't conversation, or when the conversation is all about the mundane type things, who's getting the kids, what are we having for dinner, all of those things, I
Yeah.
tend to go further and further and further. And the more days where that happens, I'm further away where, if
Yeah.
there is a month that goes by without any real connection or real conversation, real intimacy in any way, my symptoms of all aspects become worse, of all aspects of migraines and all other things, like even these depressed type feelings, they snowball when there's more time that goes by without this connection. And I
Yeah.
know that you're going to tell us a little bit about what happens when you have a supportive spouse.
Okay, so talking about having a supportive partner, it's there is research out there, and I'm going to share with you for the show notes some of the articles and everything that I have read from. And so there's research that shows that women that have supportive partners during any kind of health related issue, um, whether it be going through perimenopause or having another medical diagnosis, whatever it might be, it does show that their symptoms can be reduced. And a lot of people say, well, why would that even matter? I mean, you're sick anyway, or whatever the case might be. But when you think about it, that comes back to emotional connection. So it lowers cortisol, it lowers inflammation, and it can even lower, potential disease risk because you have someone that's supporting you through your health. And, they report fewer menopausal symptoms and lower anxiety when they have that supported spouse. And really, that spouse, the way that they respond to her symptoms shapes her stress response
Mm,
and her long term resilience. So if you have someone that's constantly being supportive of you, you're going to feel different about yourself, right? That someone's got your back, that you're not alone in this, versus someone that doesn't believe what you say or puts you down for how you're feeling. You're going to have higher levels of stress because you're going to constantly feel like that you're being pushed under a rug or told you're not good enough or you're not worth for them to support you, right? And that shared understanding, when you have someone that has a shared understanding with you, it reduces conflict and it improves intimacy and it strengthens trust in your relationship. So there's a good studies about this. And so when you think about it in any part of your life, right? I mean, you're probably going to be more successful when you have a partner that supports you in what you're going through, other than someone that decides that you're not worth supporting. And so you suffer, in that regards.
I want to bring up two things to add on because you said the ones who dismiss your symptoms. What about the two other things that came to mind that I think are really hurtful for us at this stage is silence because they don't know what to say to us because we're different or whatever. So silence. And then the other one is the barrier of a screen, the barrier of a screen that we all have in front of us. So talk about, if you can, how those two things impact what you're saying about the supportiveness of the other partner.
Yeah. So, when you think about that, dismissive part, you're not going to have, having someone that dismisses your lived experience, right? That dehuman, makes you feel less human. I want to try to get that less human. and and then kind of talking about, sometimes your spouse can be a trigger. In some situations, we talked about that a little bit earlier about how that can impact, how you feel supported because how they respond to you, things that they say to you, feeling dismissed, along those ways can really just hurt you. I think it's more of a almost like a trauma, having someone dismiss your lived experience. And then, yes, we all have our phones glued to us, attached to us at all given times. And that is a barrier for most communication and any kind of intimacy in your relationship. And a lot of people don't think about that. My husband and I are sometimes guilty of that after a long day of work, coming in, just, laying on the couch after dinner and just mindlessly scrolling because we're decompressing, right? We both need to decompress a little bit. But it does take that effort for us to say, okay, we're done with that. Why don't you come sit with me on the couch? Let's watch, one of our shows or whatever it might be. But that is a big barrier, just like you said. I mean, if we don't stop that, consciously stop that, you're like you said, we're going to go weeks, maybe even a month without having any of that connection. And when you think about that, that comes to the silence piece of it. We don't talk anymore. And that just continues to push us further and further apart. And that's where we get that disconnection in the relationship.
Yeah, and I think, I know that silence can be so painful because you want the validation. You want them to see that you're trying your best or see that you're having a hard day or whatever. And the silence just really makes it feel like it's your fault,
Yep.
even though
Mhm.
you know they're not trying to make you feel that way. But the silence just feels hard because of that piece.
It does. It does. And that's what you hear a lot and people say in long-term relationships is, we just don't talk anymore.
Mhm.
And boy, that is a hard one to come back from. And usually folks that are kind of telling me things like that, I make that recommendation. If you're both agreeing, that's where you need to start looking at some professional services, that could really help you, because if you're getting into we can't talk to each other, then that you need real tools, you need real professionals that can kind of help you get back to having this good communication pattern again. And that's hard. It does take effort. I like the people to understand that. Like once you've gone that far and you're living in silence with each other and you're on parallel lives, it's a tough one. You have to really be committed at that point.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up the therapy because I think that we mentioned earlier how the estrogen veil, like it's almost like your marriage problems that were already there can be amplified by
Right.
this time of life and seeking counseling, seeking help. Like it's a wonderful thing to do, putting in
Absolutely.
that effort and being vulnerable enough. And, sometimes another partner might not want to do that, but just
Right.
being able to educate of, hey, this is real, this is happening, let's get some help. The therapy is such a great thing to do. And also there are some tools like these couples cards that have, I wish I had the name on the tip of my tongue right now. They have questions. Like these
Mhm.
cards have questions. For example, talk about your kindergarten teacher and what you liked about them. Like these very benign questions, but
Yeah.
for us, we do struggle sometimes with having a conversation. And these
Mhm.
cards are very helpful because even though you're talking about maybe something that happened in elementary school, the idea is that you're talking about something other than your day-to-day stuff and
Yes.
that communication, that emotional connection is there. So
Yeah.
just know that there are definitely tools to help you with your conversation if you're struggling in that way.
Yeah. I always like to say it's you've become co-managers of your household. You're not a husband and wife at that time. You're just both co-managers. And, that's not a intimate relationship at that time.
Well, and a lot of times, and this is a whole thing, but a lot of times the woman is carrying much more than in terms of managing the household. And then I think
Very
that resentment can get built up because of that.
That's so true, and that is one post that I have put out kind of recently. It kind of describes some of that pieces of it, and it talks about how you have a conversation with your spouse. It might even be this estrogen veil one. How you have this conversation with your spouse about mental, emotional load, and all these types of things. And I had someone comment on it, and I said, this is great information, but it really still leaves the responsibility on the woman to have these conversations.
Mhm.
And my response back was, that is true if you've never had these conversations before in your marriage. Your spouse is not just going to automatically recognize that you've always carried the mental load and carried way more than they did. Now they appreciated it. I'm not saying but they've always probably appreciated how the household ran and how things were done, but they're not seeing that now you can't do it. You know what I'm saying? Like they don't see that all of a sudden you've come to a point where you're like, hold up, I just can't keep doing all this. Like I need your help.
Mhm.
So it's not going to always be very obvious. Some men, yes, they'll notice that and they'll say, I see you're struggling. I want to help out. But not every man. And I just want to say that just not every man will notice that. So, yes, it is on you when you feel this pain and you feel this, this unevenness. Yes, you do need to bring it out.
Hmm.
And I get we want our men to notice this, but we also have to be realistic. Not all our men are going to notice that we've hit a hormonal wall. Sometimes we don't even recognize it ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, that's so valid. And I've had clients say to me, like, oh, it's just one more thing I have to do. I'm the one who has to have the conversation. And
Right.
it can be frustrating to
Yes.
know, but it's also it having that conversation could change the trajectory of your entire marriage or your entire partnership because even though, yes, it's one more thing that you are explaining and one more thing that you have to try to get them to the table, that
Mm-hmm.
can be exhausting 100%. It
Sure.
is important to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
If it's your relationship is worth it, if you still want your relationship to be that, be one of support, then you do have to bring that person up to speed to where you are. And there's no shame in saying, look, I have done this for a really long time, and either I don't want to do it or I can't do it. And we
mhm,
have to talk about what that looks like for us now in our relationship and how we can support each other, both of us, right? Because I had this conversation with my husband. I said, I just can't keep doing this. And he said, well, I just can't keep doing these things. And I
mm,
was like, oh, I didn't realize that was hard for you. And so it kind of brought some things out that I was thinking, me, like, I've been doing all this for years. And he's saying, well, I've been doing this and this and this and this and this. And I was like, well, you're right. So, how can we even out this load and help each other both? Hey, can we hire somebody to do some of these things? Or can some of these things just stop because
mm,
are they really bringing us value anymore? And what is, could we use an app that kind of
mm.
helps track all this stuff? What could be some options for us? We laid out some really unique things and it really took the load off of both of us. And we didn't realize that both of us were kind of resenting each other a little bit because we both thought we were doing more than we should.
That's helpful. I know I've seen that with clients too, and I just created a partner communication guide that I'll put how to get a hold of that in the show notes also. And it has some ideas about some do's and don'ts of what we should be, how to have a conversation, and then
Great.
also how to divide the labor possibly.
Yes.
So even
Yes.
the idea of one thing I love on there is it says, you take care of dinner tonight, but not me tell you what to do. You actually just completely take care of it.
Yes. And
Yeah.
yes. And I just want to keep coming back as what I feel like, and this is just Brooke's, you know, her little idea here is that, us ladies that grew up in the 70s and 80s, we seen the hustle culture come to life. And we were told, do it all, be the superwoman, climb to the top of the ladder, no matter what, hold the family together, carry it all because we are superwomen.
Mm.
And we did it. We've done it and we carried it. And then we hit this
Now we're
hormonal
broken.
and we go, we can't do it. We can't do it. And then all of a sudden, the people around us are like, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you changing? And I really feel like that's kind of what's happened to our generation is we've got
Yes.
to that point. And I do just have to share something funny. So I did read something on social media today, and I'm not saying this to offend anyone by the name of Karen, but there's a lot of memes out there that say that certain women are Karens, right? But they said, well, what if Karen is actually a woman going through perimenopause? And I thought, I can recognize Karen.
Yeah.
I am Karen.
That's so helpful. I love that. I love that.
Yes. So
Yeah.
I just kind of point that out that I think a lot of times we've probably taken on a lot and we've just been
Yes.
taught to do that.
Hmm.
And when we sit
Yes.
down at this time of life to really reevaluate what's working for us, a lot of times that's hard for us to talk about it, right? Because we used to carry everything and we felt
Absolutely.
good carrying it because we were super women.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, even in the intro to this podcast, you already heard that absolutely reject hustle culture. I feel like it is the detriment of all mankind because
Mhm.
it's just leading us nowhere good. And
No, and it punishes you. It does not reward you, essentially. It's really a
absolutely.
punisher. Hmm.
Absolutely. And we could talk about how detrimental that is for marriage. This podcast could be 3 hours long probably, but we're not gonna do that. We're gonna wrap it up.
Great.
The one thing that I want to make sure we end on is some practical ways that the couple we've talked about this throughout the whole conversation, but is
Sure.
there anything else that we should bring up that are practical ways that the couples can talk about hormones? And I love this part is checking in on what each other needs.
So actually, the Gottman Institute, they're very much well known for relationship research, and they are both credentialed folks that do all these things, and they've done therapy and all these things. They're great, and they have coined something called the check-in, and it could be a weekly check-in, a monthly check-in, or what have you. And it kind of goes back to the point where you said, Rachel, that you might even go a month without having any real connection with your spouse because we become co-managers of the house and we both just do our own things. But if you can plan a weekly check-in, whatever day works for you, maybe it's Sunday, maybe it's Friday night, whatever, and you kind of base it on a couple of questions that you want to focus on. You agree what questions you're going to focus on. Some people say, what went good this week, what felt heavy this week, and what kind of support do you need from me now?
Mm,
Gosh, can you imagine your spouse asking you, what kind of support do you need from me now? Wow, we would all fall on the floor. We would just love that, right?
mhm,
So, but if you plan this and you both agree on what questions you're going to ask, and it's just a real short thing, maybe 10 minutes, right? Each of you get to ask these questions of each other, and then you kind of set the tone for the week, and you kind of know where you're at, what things are going on. You kind of also give a brief update, like, this is what's going to happen next week. I'm going to be a little busy, blah blah blah, I might need your help. Can you take care of this and I'll take care of that. You kind of do some of the planning at that point in time too, but it's just a connection for you two. It's
mm,
just a connection that you can depend on, that you can check in on. Maybe another question is, what's something on your mind that you just haven't told me yet?
mm,
That's something that you haven't said, have time to tell me this week, whatever it might be. And those go really far, especially when you're in times of change and
mm,
transition, because what you're doing, the ultimate goal is just to keep the connection alive between you two. And it's not about fixing everything at that point. If something does come out of that, that's going to be something that you guys really need to talk about. You also have to plan that, because if you're planning this on a Sunday night before bed, you're not going to want to have a long drawn out conversation about something. So you need to plan that conversation. Say, I hear you, and let's plan this for this time tomorrow, or whatever it might be, so we can both talk about it. Because you have to match energy, is what I try to tell people too. Your capacity is completely different for energy, and you're not going to be talking to me about something really important, like you said, after 6 o'clock at night, because who knows what I'm going to tell you.
yep.
It might not even be relevant by that time. So
Mhm. Absolutely. That's such a great thing to bring up. In my partner communication guide, it does guide you through that check-in. So,
great.
so make sure that you check the show notes for how to get that. And that
Yeah.
being said, Brooke, is there anything else that you want to leave us with that we haven't covered?
Well, what I just want people to know is, look, there are so many people going through this, and you're not alone in this. Everybody is struggling, just to be honest. I mean, if you hear somebody that's not struggling with it, they're probably just not being very truthful about it. And midlife, it's different. It's not the same, and you should not expect it to be the same as your 20s or your 30s. And so this is the time to redesign with your spouse what you want that second act to look like, and you got to be super honest. And that's what I tell people. That's why that estrogen veil lifted. It says, be honest. Now the time to do it, because you know what? You might have, 30, 40, 50 years left to go. Don't you want those to be the best? Don't you want those to be the most fun? Don't you want those the ones that you go, I'm wild and free, you know? So that's what I want to tell people is just, think about it. Look, everybody has this, and it's really how you look at it through your mindset, how you agree to support each other.
Love that. I love that you reminded us that we can redesign our lives at this point. That's such a beautiful perspective. And the mindset piece is everything. I just want to quickly point out that if you go back to episode 56, you'll hear me talk to Jane Butler, and she talks all about the mindset of menopause. And I
Oh,
think that would lead perfectly after this one. So that's episode 56. Check that out. Brooke, I'm so grateful for the time that you've spent with us, sharing your wisdom. You have been a wealth of information, and I love how you have assimilated all of the research that you've done and how you're helping so many people through your channel. Please tell people how, I mean, I think I've already talked about it, but tell people how they can find you and anything else that you want to say.
Sure. Thank you, Rachel. It's been a great conversation. And I think the more, like we said, we have these conversations, we normalize it for people. And that's so important, especially during the stage of life. But yes, my handle on Instagram is at marriage in perimenopause, because that's where it all started with me and my marriage. And also, I have just finalized my course that is called the midlife. Excuse me. Okay, just finalized my course, the Hormone Informed Midlife Marriage. And essentially, what it does is it walks you all through the science, it walks you through the relationship pieces of it, it walks you through redesigning what your new couple's roadmap is going to look like for your second act. It talks about how you should get the right care and why you deserve it in midlife. And it just really is designed to relate to you as a couple. So the course really isn't just for women and it isn't just for men. It's designed for you to go through it as a couple. So you'll know what to expect, when to expect it, and how to support each other. Because that's ultimately what we want to do. We want to have a marriage that is supportive of who we are at this point in life and redesign our marriage. So
Love it. Thank you so much, everyone. Make sure you follow at Marriage in Perimenopause. You can find me at Rachel Carta RN. I can't wait to hear what you thought about this episode. I want to hear your thoughts. I'm so proud of you for showing up. You've been listening to these episodes, learning more, staying motivated, staying inspired. Remember, this whole entire platform is meant to help you live an inspired life, to take the breath that you've been gifted with, the breath that runs through your body, and live in an inspired way. Remember that the changes that you're going through in midlife, they do not have to define your future in a negative way. There's so much you can do. I'm working on a class right now that's going to talk about the mood swing piece of the puzzle and how we can help to bring those into stability. I'll leave you some information in the show notes about that, but keep following along, keep sharing this podcast, because we need to break the silence about women's health and all the things that are surrounding this, so that that next generation knows what they're in for, and so that we can all be more empowered together. Thank you all so much for showing up. Thank you, Brooke, for being here, and I'll see you all on the next episode. If you've been listening to my podcast for a while, or maybe you found me on Instagram at Peace in Perimenopause, and you've been realizing that something here sounds so spot on. You feel it in your gut that you know that there's more to your symptoms and that they're all connected and that there is a solution. You don't have to figure this out alone, and you can learn more about working with me at rachelcartarn.com. Here you can book a session and we can talk about what's going on for you and how I can help. There's no reason to keep struggling. You have every reason to make this call if you feel like this is the year where you're finally going to start feeling better, where you're finally going to feel calm in your body, not rushed all the time or dealing with horrible symptoms. Maybe you're ready to feel confident, finally, right? What are we waiting for? And maybe you're ready to feel like yourself again, only a lot better, because now you're empowered. You know exactly what health habits are going to move the needle for you. You're finally ready to stop chasing those quick fixes and find something that actually works. I always say small hinges swing big doors. Let's figure out what those hinges are for you so that you can live the life you were always designed to live. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Living Inspired podcast. Your presence in this space is deeply appreciated. Remember, living a healthy life, mind, body, and spirit doesn't happen by accident. It's the result of conscious choices and intentional living. Each time you listen, you are taking a step towards flooding your life with positivity, love, light, and health. If you found value in today's episode, please share it with 3 friends. I'm honored to be part of your journey. I'll see you in the next episode.